This is Cirencester today, as we all know it, but 2,000 years ago it looked very different. Shall we have a look? After the Roman invasion in 43 AD, the native inhabitants of Corinium eagerly embraced the new Roman culture. During the invasion, the 8,000 Roman cavalrymen easily dominated the small Iron Age population of Corinium. But when they arrived here, it was a small land surrounded by a boggy river valley. So why was it so important to the Romans?
Now, you might be expecting to see a load of Romans walking around this town, but that wasn't the case. Corinium Dobrunorum was a civitas, the tribal capital of the Dobuni. This meant that it was mainly made up of native people, those who had once been invaded by the Romans, now embracing the new Roman way of life. They created a town plan mimicking that of Roman towns all over the world, with long straight roads and squares of houses called insulae. In fact, the roads around this part of town, near what would have been the edge of the basilica, are laid out almost identical to how they would have been in Roman times. You can still get a sense of that very Roman town plan.
All this trade created a wealthy community, and by the 2nd century, a large stone wall enclosed the town with grand gates, standing at 6 meters tall and securing an area of 240 acres. These walls were an imposing sight for anybody entering along one of the main trade roads. You can still see evidence of the walls around the town here in the Abbey grounds. There are very well preserved town walls still in situ, and you can follow these around past the barn theatre and along the city bank where the ramparts are still visible.
As the town evolved, industries such as mosaic creating and stone cutting were prominent. Art schools were created for budding mosaic makers. The rich inhabitants began to build lavish houses with courtyards, and they adorned them with these mosaics to show off their wealth.
One of the most impressive things left behind by the inhabitants of Corinium was its enormous amphitheatre. In Roman times, this entire place was filled with wooden seating, with the front seating, the immersive, reserved for only the upper echelons of society.
Wherever you were sat, the atmosphere must have been intense, watching spectacles such as battle reenactments, gladiatorial games and animal shows, all showing off the extent of the empire they were all now a part of. Romans really didn't mind a bit of blood and gore. So, what happened to this bustling, important town? In 410 AD, the Romans withdrew from Britain. Without those trade networks, and with a change in the tone of the country, places like Corinium became less and less important. By 430 AD, in less than 20 years, the Forum was abandoned and the residents of Corinium had moved elsewhere. The once bustling and vibrant town was left to erode and fade into the landscape. Cirencester had become a pretty low-key area since the Romans left. By the time William the Conqueror arrived and created the Domesday Book in 1086, Cirencester was noted as having a population of just 350 people. Although small, this town was still seen as an important place, and in 1117, King Henry I ordered an abbey to be built here. It is likely that the abbey was built upon grounds previously inhabited by a Saxon church, and even before that, a probable site of a Roman building.
The abbey was the first of a number of religious buildings to be erected, with the beginning of the church we see today, beginning shortly after in 1150 AD, St. Catherine's Chapel. In 1176, the abbey was completed and dedicated to St. Mary. It was an Augustinian monastery, which is a Roman Catholic religion. Cirencester was beginning to flourish once more as a town, and in 1186 a charter had been granted to the town to run a Sunday market. Land in Cirencester previously held by the crown was sold in 1189 by King Richard I to the abbey for just £100, and this changed the tone of the town. The abbot, the head of the abbey, gained much power over the town, effectively becoming a landlord and tax collector as well as a religious leader. With new control over the market, the abbot changed them to Monday and Friday.
The people of Cirencester were not always happy with the control that the abbey held over their town, but with the king's favour towards the abbot, the people of Cirencester were still struggling for their rights for centuries. Despite this, the prosperity of Cirencester had begun to grow, once again a trade area, and now with a renewed industry of wool.
The Cotswold lion sheep was thought to be brought over by the Romans, its wool so famous that it was called the Golden Fleece.
Cotswolds comes from the name of Cots meaning sheep and Wolds meaning hills, literally meaning sheep hills. The most expensive wool came from Abbey lands and Northleach. By the 15th century, the wool trade paid for Trinity Chapel in St John the Baptist.
The Abbey mill, used by monks, fell out of use in the 16th century under the reign of King Henry VIII. The Burial in Wool Act of 1667 and 1678 said that all bodies were to be buried in wool unless they had died of the plague.
Half of the wealth of England had come off the back of sheep.
By the 18th century, St John's Church was built and completed. The weaving industry grew, producing some of the scarlet cloth worn at Waterloo.
Betsy Ross reportedly used it for the first American flag. Cirencester refused in the Industrial Revolution as cotton mills went up north.
In 1862, the Corn Hall was built as a social and business hub.
The corn exchange faded until a small market was brought back in the 1970s. Work began on the building in 1862.
Alongside the main hall, the building housed a library, reading rooms, a public office for business, and a school of arts. Now we're very lucky to be joined by Cirencester's expert on the World Wars, I think that's fair to say, Bill. Nice to meet you.
And you?
So what was Cirencester like during World War II in particular?
Well, I would guess it was like a lot of other places, although I was actually born in Cheshire and didn't come to Gloucestershire until 1960. But there was a saying in Cirencester that if you opened any door in the marketplace, a committee would fall out, because there were committees for everything. I mean, there was the Home Guard, there was the AFS, all sorts of committees, people who looked after evacuee children, because we had a train full of evacuee children here on the 1st of September, that was on the Friday before the war actually started. So homes had to be found for all of those children. So there was a committee that organised that. In a lot of places, the children just arrived and they stood them in a row and somebody picked out who they wanted. But in Cirencester, it was much, much better organised than that. Everybody knew where the children were going and who they were going to stay with. I think it was about 12 and 6 months a week if you had one evacuee, and the second evacuee you got 10 and 6 months a week, but I should have to check that, but I think that's pretty likely. The Home Guard, because in 1940 when the Home Guard was started, which was originally called the Local Defence Volunteers, the children stood for LDV, stood for Look, Duck and Vanish. But they would then look at how the town could be protected in case there was an invasion. And of course Hitler did have a plan to invade Britain once he got taken over France. And it was called Operation Sea Lion. And they were going to come across the channel and going to come up as far as the A40, which would have, impinged on Cirencester, and then sweep round along the A40 and come down onto Oxford. Of course, Hitler wanted Oxford as his capital when he took over the country, if he took over the country. and then down into London. So Cirencester would have been sort of almost front line, I suppose, you could say that. And then you've got the WVS, Women's Voluntary Service, later Women's Royal Voluntary Service, set up by Lady Reading. So there was ladies that did that. They helped with feeding people and looking after evacuees. So all that was going on, and that would have gone on in lots of towns and villages all over the country, because we were on a war footing. And but say I was actually born in London. I was born in Cheshire, but my mother was heavily pregnant in London with me, and I left London when she was 6 months pregnant. But I'd already been in an air raid shelter, because she fell into an air raid shelter one night because of the extra weight she was carrying, i.e. me. So I always tell people I was in an Anderson shelter 3 months before I was born. But there were at least 4 Anderson shelters delivered in Cirencester, which people put up in their gardens. Otherwise, you went home, you went under your kitchen table or under the stairs, somewhere safe. And of course, the ARP was started before the war, started in 1938. And they made sure that everybody had a gas mask. Because the great fear was for gas, because gas had been used in the First World War. And most people would have, of an age, would have known somebody who'd been gassed in the First World War. So it was a big fear. And of course there was that new technology called the aeroplane that was going to drop gas bombs on you. So there was a great surge to make sure that everybody had a gas mask, from the smallest baby to the oldest person. And of course gas was never used in the Second World War anyway, not in England. And so the ARP would have gone around, made sure you've got your blackout up, make sure you were fitted with your gas mask. And then there was a quiet period when they had nothing much to do. And then the war started in earnest with the invasion of France and whatnot. So there would have been committees, and people would be organising. Say what you like about the British, we are good at organising, especially if it comes down to a committee. And that would have been true of most places in the country, I suppose. Certainly in the southern part of the country. Yeah, I've got friends who've researched it in much more detail, but I know a little bit about what went on in the town.
Yeah, that's a wonderful insight.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much for speaking to me today.
It's been a pleasure. Come and see us again.
Cirencester wouldn't be the town it is today without its past, but unfortunately we're in the present, so this is where it ends. We'd like to say thank you to everyone involved in the project, and goodbye.